Welcome back to some PWHL action. Hope everyone enjoyed the Olympic break, and thank God the West Coast games are on the weekend. The Sceptres win their first game back 5-2 over the Seattle Torrent in Seattle. And this was a tight one. I think a lot of Torrent fans might say, well, the Sceptres only won because Seattle didn't have Knight in the lineup and they didn't have Bilka in the lineup. And I'm not even going to necessarily say they're wrong, but you can only play the team that's in front of you, and boy howdy, Toronto did. 28 seconds into the first period, Blair Turnbull, keeping the puck alive, keeping it away from Seattle in the neutral zone, gets it over to Watts. Watts works it in, cuts across in front of Murphy. It looked like she actually tried to maybe shoot, but it gets blocked off of Carpenter's stick and goes right into the open area where Comfer is streaking into, and she puts it right past the glove of Murphy. Wham bam boom. Not even half a minute into the game and Toronto's already got a lead. Okay. For that first half of the first period especially, Toronto wasn't letting Seattle do anything. Toronto's neutral zone was incredible. Seattle wasn't allowed to break into the offensive zone. Toronto was running the game, you know. They might not necessarily have had like the most offensive time themselves. They had a good bit of ozone pressure, but it was more so that they were just shutting down the Torrent at every single turn. But with about only 12 seconds left in the period, Seattle being able to get themselves into position a little bit, Serdachny throws a puck backdoor to an incoming Teralova, and it's just a defensive breakdown. I don't know who was supposed to have her. If it was Turnbull, if it was, I think, Monroe was also on the ice. There were like three people gliding in behind Teralova, but no one was in front of her. No one was preventing her from getting that pass. She completely slipped in behind the defense. And good on her, just a complete defensive breakdown by Toronto. Yeah, there's only 12 seconds left to play in the period, but that's still 12 seconds you have to play, right? You play to the horn, you play to the whistle. So you go into the first intermission tied 1-1. That's an okay position to be in. They had a bit more pressure. They were out shooting. One defensive breakdown doesn't dictate a whole period. Get into the second, 4.5 minutes in. Renata Fast, with the flukiest of fluke goals that have ever fluked, she's behind the goal line and just throws it out front. Murphy has the post completely sealed off, and she has her arm and her paddle just extended out a little in front of her, presumably to try to prevent any passes going through, try to stop anything cross crease or back door, and it goes off like the bottom of her hand, off the bottom of her blocker, just deflects and bounces in. No one expected that to go in, not Murphy, not Fast, I don't think. But they don't ask how, they ask how many, and Toronto's back on top 5 minutes into the second. And then, with barely over a minute to go, the Torrent get a 2-on-1. Carpenter takes the shot. Kirk makes a really good save, but Snodgrass is able to pick up the rebound, and Kirk did get a piece of it, but just not quite enough. And it goes and ties the game back up at 2. And then with less than a second left in the period, Malte took a holding penalty. So the Torrent would start the third period with a minute 59 of power play time. Fortunately, they weren't able to capitalize on it, but they did have a couple chances, you know. The Torrent were able to actually get the ball rolling a little bit on a couple of their power plays. Toronto, you know, they only had one power play, and I believe officially it wasn't registered as having a shot. Flanagan rung one off the post, but not a shot. They kill that off into the third period. 6 minutes in, Malte coming down on a 2-on-1 with Spooner, looks off the pass and just rips it clean. Like, no screen, no nothing, just a beautiful shot, rocket of a shot, over Murphy's shoulder, and Toronto retakes the lead. And that would stand as the game-winning goal. Toronto would tack on 2 more empty netters with 2 minutes left in the period, going to Jalmerson and Flanagan, respectively. But this was a tight game. It was a good game. It was entertaining. And I think for the most part, Toronto was able to stay disciplined, except for kind of 2 usual suspects, right? One big problem Toronto has had this season is penalty trouble and spending so much of games on the penalty kill. The problem is the people taking the penalties in this game were Malte and Fast, because Fast got a holding penalty. And those are both penalty killers, right? It's not ideal. And it's so common for those two. They're very needless penalties. Like, they're both blatant holding calls where they're just, like, wrapping their arms around players and, like, flinging them around like it's jujitsu. It doesn't need to be happening. They're very avoidable penalties, and I think that's the most frustrating part. You need to put your team in a position to succeed, especially Fast being one of the assistant captains. Like, you're setting them up for failure every time you take a penalty, and it's so common for them and so frequent for them. I just wish they would be a bit more careful. But the bigger story I noticed in this game is Toronto came out in the first period full of gas, ready to go. From puck drop, they are on it. But it kind of petered out over the course of the period. Second period comes in. They get onto the ice, they're fired right back up. Maybe not as much as they were at the beginning of the first, but refueled the tank, let's go. And they did, and they started off the second period really well, but again, it kind of petered out. And the third period was much the same thing. It came out really good and faded away, but every single start of each period was a little bit less than the start of the last one. So over the course of the game as a whole, they kind of were fading a little bit, and each individual period was its own more condensed example of that. So, maybe Turnbull or Fast or Monroe or whomever else is in the locker room giving a speech, firing up the team, and then whatever happens in the period happens. They can't necessarily do that from the bench. Troy Ryan doesn't strike me as that type of guy, but that's a conversation I've had before. And then the intermission comes around and it's the same thing. The leadership group or whoever else fires the team up, they come out swinging, and they let themselves fade. They run out of gas, right? Or their battery depletes, and it's not something you like to see. And it worked out okay in this game, but for a game as tight as this one was, Seattle wound up out-shooting Toronto, granted only by 2, but hey, it is out-shooting, right? It was only a 1-goal game, so that could have been the difference. Well, minus the empty netters. In games this close, in seasons this short, and with them being in the position that they are, right, they're 7th place in the league, maybe 6th now after this game, but they're not riding high. They need to be pedal to the metal the whole time. But if they're only filling up the tank halfway, right, they go pedal to the metal for, 8-ish minutes a period. Shifts are only 45 seconds long. You need to be going ham for those 45 seconds. You need to be on it. And that's why the defensive breakdowns, especially on that first goal for Seattle, Teralova just got in behind 3 people, and none of them, on the replay you can see, none of them are even taking a stride towards her. You gotta, button yourselves up a little bit. Seattle's second goal in the 2-on-1, Fast, you can see her fighting for body position a little bit with Snodgrass, but she gets by her, and then Fast goes, got me. Keep skating. Take another stride or two. At least reach your stick in the way if you're not going to do that. If you're running out of steam, like, it's been more glaring in other games where they blow leads or they give up goals very quickly after they get one. It's a bit more obvious when this type of stuff happens, or it's a bit of a bigger, more immediate drop off. But this game, they just, over the course of the periods, they would fade and just kind of, put less and less energy and effort and electricity into their game. And they were lucky enough to be able to get it done in those first 4, 5, 6 minutes of the periods, right? I will say, in their offensive zone efforts, it seemed a bit more threatening. One of the biggest issues that the Sceptres have had this season is their offense is all just perimeter nonsense. And it did seem like they were working it into the middle of the ice and into the gut area of the offensive zone a bit more to get more high danger chances. The first goal, especially with Watts being able to tear right down the artery in the front, it's encouraging to see. And even on, the one power play that they had, yeah, they had a couple of point shots, but there was a bit more movement, a bit more working the puck around. And it's nice to see that maybe Troy Ryan, after hearing he's kind of probably done as Canada's national team coach after the Olympics, maybe he's kind of saying, like, oh boy, might have to change some stuff up. Maybe the team training without him as the head coach during the Olympics for the players that didn't go, maybe there were different systems set up to get them going in different ways. There was encouragement in some aspects for sure, but I think a big problem with the team remains that's been plaguing them all season, that a hockey game is 60 minutes and they need to play 60 minutes. If your shift is 45 seconds, you can't start phoning it in that second 30, right? But given how things went before the break, given how awful their last 10 games have gone for them, we still have half the season left. There's plenty of time to hunt. They have a few games in quick succession here. The next game's Sunday against Vancouver, and then Tuesday they're back home again. So, it's bam, bam, bam. They can make up a lot of ground in very short order here if they're able to get the regulation wins. So far, so good. So I'll take it. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want more. I'm just happy we're back from the break.